Hello, everybody. Welcome to Planet FPL, the world where everything revolves around fantasy Premier League. My name's Sitch.
And my name is James.
And it's Tuesday, which means People's Poll. We put a vote out on Twitter, and you choose the topic. We discuss it. It's a bit of a not a celebratory one, but a milestone podcast today, because not only are we reaching a milestone later this week, 1,000 episodes, the Premier League's reaching a milestone as well, James.
Yeah, so the Premier League formed 30 years ago this week. So, I mean, anybody who's kind of watched Sky's coverage over the last couple of days probably had PL 30 rammed down their throats quite a bit. And I was very much of the assumption that last night on Monday Night Football, Gary Neville and Jamie Carragher were probably going to go through their best ever Premier League team, which they didn't, which is nice because they've done it so many times before. And I think you've probably all heard those debates about what's the greatest ever Premier League team. And obviously people will have different opinions. But I'm going to come up with something different as an idea to celebrate 30 years of the Premier League and kind of best ever team. So there were three ideas put forward. One was to pick a best ever Premier League team of players who had never won a Premier League title. So people like Steven Gerrard obviously come to mind, for example. Another idea was to pick a best ever Premier League team, picking just one player per club. People like Steven Gerrard obviously come to mind as probably a Liverpool representative. For those who've been trying it, by the way, what I've been saying to people is like, you can't have like Vieira and Henry in the team. Like they would both be Arsenal representatives. But if you want to have like Vieira and Aguero, like I'm fine with that. You're obviously not picking Vieira as the Man City pick. That would be a piss take. Yeah. So it's not they've only had to play for one club was not the idea. But you have one representative. Yeah, exactly that. But the winner of the vote, and it was extremely close between the three options, was an idea of picking a best team from the first 15 years of the Premier League and the best team of the most recent 15 years and coming to a conclusion of which team would win. This is absolutely brutal because I can imagine the comments and the replies. How can you leave this player out? Yada, yada, yada. I thought this would be easier. It's ridiculously hard. The idea came about because someone, I can't remember if it was my Ask James stream or the Deadline stream, but someone said, pick a team from the first 15 years and the second 15 years. I was like, I can't do that on the spot, right? Silly. It'd take too long. But I also said in conclusion, I said the most recent team would definitely win. No question. Because to just be, the standard of football's improved, the fitness levels, all these kind of things. It's like if you do a team from the 60s and a team from now, the individual quality of those players of the 60s might be better. But in terms of the sports science and all the stuff that goes behind the game now, it's difficult to think that a modern team wouldn't win. But then someone will have the argument and say, yeah, but those guys from the 60s played on shit pitches. Imagine what they'd be like on good pitches and stuff. So you can always have that debate where it goes either way. And what's interesting about this idea of actually splitting the first 15 years to the most recent 15 years when picking a team is there are players who kind of fall in the middle, which don't make either team. So I'll give you an example, kind of spoiler. Cristiano Ronaldo is not in either team. But I think if I was picking a best ever Premier League team, he'd probably be in it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it certainly does.
But he doesn't, I think, fall into the right category for and there's a lot of other players who you would consider definitely worthy of conversation of a best ever Premier League 11 who I haven't put in either team because their best periods are kind of around about that kind of 2005 to 2009 period, basically.
So we'll talk about both teams individually. I've seen the teams that you have touted as topics for discussion. Truth be told, I would say across both 11s, 22 players, there's only like 3 or 4 where I'm like, talk me through this because there are other players that I would disagree. I mean, there's plenty of players that could have made it, but I do
think
agree.
There's 22.
But
you
also
could have a debate for someone else.
Yeah, maybe. I think eventually you would end up back at this list potentially. So we'll talk about that. We've got a 92 to 07 team and an 07 to 2022 team. And the 1992 to 2017, you have in goal Peter Schmeichel.
Yeah. I think in terms of the first thing to say is as well, I've gone 4-4-2 for the 92-07 team. I've gone 4-3-3 for the last 15 years because I wanted to pick teams that was kind of the primary system, if you will, within the leagues. And that dominating period of United and Arsenal, certainly going up to until Mourinho came into Chelsea, in fairness, most teams played 4-4-2. There were variations. United often played 4-5-1 against Arsenal, for example. Liverpool had spells where they played 3 at the back, same as Chelsea, but the majority of teams were playing 4-4-2. So I wanted to pick a team in that system. I think Schmeichel in goal feels fairly obvious. I think the only one really to compete would arguably be David Seaman, really.
Yeah, he's the other one that I thought about. I mean, he was a hell of a goalkeeper, David Seaman, but Schmeichel just dominated. He changed the game. The way he used to throw the ball, launch it out. I would pick Schmeichel. I also like David Seaman.
But it's interesting, again, he wouldn't cope in the modern game.
Yeah, he'd struggle
because of the ball out from the back and stuff. In terms of his shot stopping, command of area and things like that, when he was at his peak in sort of the early to mid 90s, he was a phenomenon. We haven't seen a goalkeeper like him.
No.
Which is why I think he goes in, because, he was kind of a revolutionary in terms of the way he kept goal. But he would really struggle now in terms of having to play out from the back and stuff. But I think, Schmeichel, I think, is the right choice. This team is obviously heavily Manchester United and Arsenal dominated, as you would expect.
Right to left in midfield. Well, let's start with the centre-backs. You've got a pair in there, Rio Ferdinand and Tony Adams. Rio Ferdinand, I agree with. I think he was just such a good defender. Rarely had a bad game. Read the game so well. One of the first centre-backs to play the ball out. So it was so good on the ball as well. And really, really consistent. I've got a lot of love for Rio Ferdinand. You put Tony Adams next to him, and I think this is one of the ones where I'm like, okay, there was a lot of good centre backs in that era. Gary Pallister.
He's not better than Adams, no way.
No. Steve Bruce.
No.
But look, don't get me wrong. Tony Adams, I think I can understand why you've gone with Tony Adams.
I think longevity.
But he wasn't that good on the ball. He was a good defender.
Oh, no. I'm not having that.
I don't know if he was good on the ball.
No, honestly, Tony Adams was massively underrated. Incredible leader. You'd arguably
pissed half the time, mate.
Yeah, it didn't matter. And actually, once he was allowed, when Wenger came into Arsenal, when he was allowed to play out from the back, he could play. Look at the goal, the final game of the season against Everton, or not final game of the season, when they clinched the title in '98. Don't tell me he couldn't play. Like, he could play, left foot or right foot. Very good. He's
probably up there as one of the best leaders, though, that goes for it. I mean, we'll talk about the 07-22 later. You've got John Terry in there, and I'm like,
in Rio's
leadership.
Case,
yeah.
In Rio's case, I think people forget, like, he was in the West Ham team from 1997. So he'd had, and if you look through his career statistics over that period, bar the 1 year with the couldn't piss in a bottle gate, if you will, he was always playing like 35 games every season. Rarely had injuries in those first 10 years. Obviously, 3-4 years with yourselves, then went to Leeds, then obviously went on to United, was instrumental for them. I think technically he was probably the first one, really, in terms of what you're saying about ball distribution. It was obvious to us early. Pallister, Bruce, brilliant centre-backs. The one I debated really as an alternative to Ferdinand was Jaap Stam. So I think Jaap Stam was phenomenal for United. It was only there 3 years, and I couldn't really for this team, I couldn't really make a case for Stam's 3 years versus Rio Ferdinand's 10 years. I know some people be screaming about John Terry's titles in 05-06, John Terry's to come.
Okay. Fullbacks, I actually didn't argue with you at all. I mean, Ashley Cole on the left, he'd argue he'd make an all-time Premier League 11 as left back. So
yeah,
I can't argue with that at all. And Gary Neville on the other side, again, probably not the most talented, but he made the best of everything he had. Consistent as hell, work rate, you can't argue. Yeah, really, really good. Yeah,
solid as. I think people forget how good his delivery was from that side with David Beckham and stuff as well. Ashley Cole, ironically, wasn't as straightforward a choice as Gary Neville, because I think Dennis Irwin has every right to be in the conversation. I think over that 15-year period, he probably made more Premier League appearances than Ashley Cole. But Ashley Cole's rise was so quick in the sense that I think he'd only played about 10, 12 games for Arsenal before he played for England.
Yeah.
In 2001. And I think in the period sort of 2003 to 2006, I think he had genuine claim to be classed as the best left back in the world. And therefore, for me, because of that spell in the early noughties, it had to go in for me, I think.
Central midfield, Scholes and Vieira.
Oh,
Vieira,
this is a nightmare. I don't really want to talk about this when you think about the players you're leaving out.
what, Roy Keane?
Oh, yeah, there's more than that as well. But yeah, I think Roy Keane's the one, and I don't want to leave him out. What I could have done with this was gone three in midfield and gone like, yeah, Keane, Scholes, Vieira. People are already going to be screaming about Steven Gerrard and stuff. It's fine. Many of the listeners will know I have a preference for Scholes over Gerrard Lampard anyway. It's just how I feel. For me, Vieira over Keane. But then that almost doesn't make sense when you look at the honours and how long Keane did it for United. I just like the balance of those two. It's a personal preference. I just think Scholes and Vieira as a midfield would have been incredible, as was Vieira and Emmanuel Petit, as was obviously Scholes and Roy Keane. The players that you're leaving out in central midfield is I wanted to change the system. I wanted to change the system from 4-4-2, but I thought, no, you've got to stick with it, James. Go with two in midfield. That's from that era. The preference for me, would have been Scholes and Vieira. I think definitely Vieira would be the first name for me personally. Every chance you'd make a case for Roy Keane over Paul Scholes. I just had a preference that I wanted a bit more attacking ability in there. That's
anyone else that was from that era you didn't make it in?
I
think a number 10 like a Cantona or
well, there's no number 10s in this, which is
that's the
because
thing, right?
The front two, as we come on to, I think it cannot be any other combination than the front two that I picked. But the number 10s you're leaving out again. That's what I thought. Or can I go play a diamond, leave out the wide players, and you can put like a Bergkamp in there or a Zola or a Cantona? I mean, these players that you're not like picking in is like it's ridiculous. It's insulting not to have them as part of it. Really, they're all incredible players. But I decided, not to go over 10 because I think system-wise at that time you had things like say with Arsenal, Bergkamp and Henry, but it was still primarily 4-4-2. Yeah, absolutely. And as we'll come on to the front two, but I you can't make a case against these front two. I think that's the front two in this has to be the front two. Whereas in the midfield, like if someone wants to go Keane over Scholes or Vieira, like there's no argument. If you prefer it that way, not a problem. And one of the reasons I think I also couldn't take the piss with playing 4-4-2 is really Ryan Giggs has to be in here.
Well, we're going to move on to the wingers and Giggs just for longevity, titles, trophies, success. Yeah, I mean he's the most decorated player, isn't he? Possibly, probably, if not.
Yeah, it's not off the pitch as his ongoing court case will tell you off the pitch. But if we're just treating this on pitch merits at the moment, then I think Ryan Giggs would, for the first 15 years of the Premier League, he has to go in that team. And therefore I couldn't think about going with diamonds and mucking with the system and not having him in there, which has kind of made the right hand side. I've gone with Bex as kind of default. Again, obviously, great period at United from sort of 95 going on to 2003. I think he left. Wasn't blessed like most wingers in terms of he was never going to take his man on, etc. But I think what he did for the game as well is worth remembering. He kind of kicked off the real superstardom nature of the.
Yeah,
well, that was Liverpool players, but
I thought it was with him with the white suits and all that.
I mean, the goal at Wimbledon is so iconic and kick-started him to superstardom before he'd even pulled on an England shirt, played for England, made his debut for England like 3 weeks after that. And of course, that was straight off the back of Euro 96. So the uplift around the country, around that tournament, him kicking on, brilliant for England. I always give it everything for England. And solid as that relationship on the right-hand side with him and Gary Neville. And actually, when I started thinking about players to put on the right-hand side, I was thinking, could I be cheeky and put Steven Gerrard down? And you think, I want to play Gerrard over Beckham probably. But it's not right. Steven Gerrard's central, isn't he? He's not right-hand side of midfield. And could you make a case for Ronaldo on the period of like 03 to 07 or so? Couldn't really. If it had been the block of like 05 to 09, then yeah, definitely Ronaldo. But 03 to 07, no. It wasn't enough for me to pick him over Beckham. I'm obviously not saying David Beckham's a better player than Ronaldo. Of course I'm not. But I think for the first 15 years of that league, I think Beckham's the right choice.
Okay. We were watching the Liverpool game yesterday, and when Trent's spreading the ball about, and some people just kick the ball differently. They just have a way of kicking the ball differently. Bex is one of those where he kicks the ball different to how the majority of players kick a ball. It's just something in their ability.
That
Trent
said,
reminded me of that.
he's probably the player I most want to remove from that team.
On
Remarkably,
ability?
he's I mean, technically amazing, but talking of like leaving out the likes of Gerrard and Keane and stuff, and that hurts. They'd like to have picked 4 central midfield players, really. Even people like who probably like won't get as much coverage, but like great servants like Gary Speed and stuff, who probably doesn't really get a mention in things like he was a brilliant player. And you think, oh, how am I overlooking that? It's like, it's so harsh. The players you leave out, it's a joke. You could pick an 11 of the players you leave out who could beat this team.
But James, we need to sell some shirts. So Beck stays in. Front two, front two. There's absolutely no argument. Alan Shearer, record Premier League goal scorer. Thierry Henry, argued by many as the greatest Premier League player of all time. I mean, there's so many.
You won't get an argument from me.
But I mean, yeah, you just can't argue with either of those two as strikers from that era.
No, you really can't. The 3 kind of players. I mean, Cantona's influence over United, 92, 97, not to put him in, he's staggering, really. Because I think like Cantona, Zola, Bergkamp, those 3, if you call them 10s, for example, like to not have them in there is ridiculous. Like, it breaks to leave them out. We're not even talking about people like amazing in the Premier League, like Les Ferdinand, Teddy Sheringham, for example, brilliant goal scorers. You get anywhere near this. Yeah. That has to be the front 2. And the only thing I think you could work around it in terms of actually making the team look as good as it possibly could would be shift to a diamond, go bring like Keane in with Scholes and Vieira, and put a Bergkamp in there behind Shearer and Henry, for example.
Just lose the width.
Probably on paper would look sexier, but I just felt it had to be a flat 4-4-2. It's got to be Shearer and Henry. It can't be. That's one I can't argue against.
And then you've got an 07 to 2022 team, which is a 4-3-3, which I think is also a la mode at the moment. I think a lot of teams playing 3. Yeah, I think up top.
The kind of the influence around the time as well. If you think of Spain, obviously winning the Euros in 2008. And then the tiki-taka style, which that Arsenal very much replicated. Barcelona played the same way as Spain, for example. The only debate, and I have thought about this, was obviously 4-2-3-1 became really on fashion and still is, following primarily the first time I remember it really being called 4-2-3-1 was Germany in 2010, when they demolished us in the last 16 and then battered Argentina in the quarterfinals as well, ultimately losing to Spain's brilliant team in the semi-final. And 4-2-3-1, but you could have gone 4-2-3-1, and we might come back to it because I think you can make the team look a little bit better 4-2-3-1, but I decided 4-3-3 is the way to go. And the players you're leaving out on this one's even worse than the first one.
Yeah, recency bias probably a little bit for a lot of people.
Like the striker I've picked, like honestly, it could have been any one of about 8, I think.
Yeah. We've got checking goal, Petr checking goal. I mean, Chelsea defensively for that entire period under Mourinho, and the home record of, what is it, like 4 years or something, not losing a home game, and that whole period. Yeah. Petr Cech, great goalkeeper.
Yeah, I think over the longevity, ironically, he also, as the game developed, began to struggle with his feet and stuff, particularly in his later days at Arsenal. But I think he'd be the one. I think, like, is he better than maybe say what Alisson is now? I mean, that's a real debate. But I think if you're going over the whole 15 years, you couldn't pick an Alisson or an Ederson ahead of him. I don't think. I don't think even peak David De Gea was incredible for Manchester United in his peak. But to put him in ahead of Cech, you think of the other title-winning teams, you wouldn't put like Kasper Schmeichel in there, or Joe Hart was very good for Manchester City, in fairness. Not ahead of Cech, though. So Courtois, worth a mention as well. I mean, it's got to be Cech.
Yep. Centre-backs, Vinny Kompany and John Terry. Vincent Kompany was really good. John Terry, I can see why he's in there because of, again, longevity, leadership that he brought to that Chelsea team, was part of the whole Abramovich era, won a lot of trophies. I don't think he was the best defender, but then, like, to be honest, I'd have VVD as a better centre-back than John Terry, but then VVD hasn't played for the entire era, hasn't got the longevity, hasn't got the trophies and titles to go with it necessarily. So I can understand why you've got John Terry in there. but I
Oh,
don't think he's the.
I mean, I'd rather put Van Dijk there, to be honest.
Yeah, but I can
And
see this is
I
not
think,
about last 2 years or 3 years or 4 years.
yeah,
It's about a 15-year period.
there's every chance when he's done and finished, we might be considering Virgil van Dijk as the best centre back in Premier League history as possible. Terry is an interesting one because he's kind of escaped that line where you could make a case to put him in the first team because he kind of broke in with Chelsea in sort of like 2001, 02. But then from 07 going up to even the title winning team in like 15, and he played in all of it, right? So you've still got like a good sort of 8-year spell there afterwards as well, where I think he was probably the best centre back in the league for the majority of those years, sort of 07 to 15 or so. Very underrated on the ball, complete arsehole. No one likes him, but I think he'd have to go in this team. And Vincent Kompany, I still feel doesn't get appreciated for as good as he was. Hampered obviously terribly by injuries and stuff, but super player, key contributions. I mean, we talk about iconic goals. The goal against Leicester. Yeah. Where do you want your statue, Vincent Kompany? I mean, it's true what it was said at the time. I think Vincent Kompany would have to go in there for me. Arguably, they'd be the best two overall at the moment, in my opinion, probably as well so far, which I'm sure like Van Dijk will take over from
that. Kyle Walker at right back. Longevity again?
Yeah, this is a really tough one. And I changed it a few times. And to be honest, it's probably more one for maybe the Manchester City fans to answer, because Zabaleta was the other name that I really, really debated. I think Branislav Ivanovic at Chelsea, he's worth a shout as well, actually. But I felt it had to come down to Walker or Zabaleta. And I think most City fans would probably say Zabaleta, but then you've got that kind of really sort of 6-7 year period at Tottenham for Kyle Walker, where he's obviously then gone on to City and won everything in spades since as well. So I think Kyle Walker just gets the nod over Zabaleta, but it feels a bit harsh that I think that's close between those two.
Patrice Evra on the left side. I think you're going to get a few pelters for this.
Go on, why?
Leighton Baines got to be in there.
Well, I tell you what. Listen, he would have been next in line. Honestly, yeah. I would. He was the one player who I think really nearly made
outside
it in,
the top 4 or 5.
Who was never even like close to winning the league title, for example. Yeah, honestly, if it not been Evra, I would have gone Leighton Baines. I think Leighton Baines has been so underrated. His quality in the Premier League, absolutely outstanding for so long. He was really unlucky that for England, he obviously had Ashley Cole in his way for a lot of the time. Yeah. And then when he broke in, had injuries and stuff, and then Danny Rose emerged, and then he was off the scene again. Leighton Baines, absolutely brilliant. I mean, it's worth saying there's a case to say Ashley Cole could have been in both teams as well, but I didn't want to do that. So I think Patrice Evra, around that period, United were obviously really dominant, sort of 07, 09. He was still a part of Ferguson's final team and stuff. So I think Evra got the edge on the titles, essentially. But yeah, Leighton Baines, honestly, was really close. So it was really, really close.
You've got a midfield 3 in here that is sexy as hell. N'Golo Kante.
Yeah, but again, the players you're leaving out drive people insane, mate.
David Silva, Kevin De Bruyne.
Yeah, I don't know if there might be a little bit of recency bias because they're all more kind of the last 7-8 years rather than the first.
Cesc Fabregas, what era is he?
I think Cesc Fabregas is worthy of conversation. In the sense, obviously, he was brilliant for Arsenal, then came back to Chelsea, was part of Antonio Conte's title winning team. So I think would definitely be. I mean, this one particularly is mad. So you think I've picked 2 teams, and Steven Gerrard's not in either. Frank Lampard's not in either. It's insulting to both of them, really. But it just felt they were on the line where it didn't fit for either, really. Yeah, I mean, Steven Gerrard for me would have to be, I think, probably in a best ever Premier League 11. Yet he doesn't make either of these teams. It doesn't feel right. But I felt what it came down to was essentially deciding on De Bruyne's last 7 years versus sort of Gerrard's first 7 years. And you can debate that either way. I just have a preference for KDB, and I think he's another one like Van Dijk. I think when he's finished, you will look back and go, oh yeah, Kevin De Bruyne should be in these sort of teams in the conversation more than he is at the moment. Phenomenal. Another one is someone like what we've seen from other players, although there are comparisons between De Bruyne and Gerrard. Kante, I think, edges in over several great other central midfield players because of the accomplishment with Leicester, and then straight away with a Chelsea team that had finished 10th as well. And again, like, no one's seen a player like him. He's coming to the end now where the injuries are obviously really starting to catch up with him. But sometimes you play against them and you feel like you're a man short, and it's because of him, the way he covers the ground and stuff. And again, he can't do it in quite the same way anymore now. But for that period, the Leicester season, then the first kind of 3 or 4 years with Chelsea, I mean, so iconic.
Yeah.
So I think Kante'd go in. And David Silva, just an absolute gorgeous football. 10 brilliant years with Manchester City. Really underrated, in my opinion, to the extent I think we have a lot of David Silva copycats now, essentially. I think for 10 years with City, and they've essentially now been the most dominant team of that period, he deserves to go in as well. But there are a number of players, honestly, you could debate leaving out. I mean, even think of, you mentioned Fabregas. You want to come further down, you think people like Luka Modric at Spurs and stuff. You can't put Luka Modric in for his Spurs period, can you? For example. But yeah, the players you leave out is, and then the front three is even worse. Again, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
So you've opted for Mo Salah. I think I'm in agreement that Salah can go in just because of the consistency of the last 4 or 5 years. He's banging in 20, 30 goals a season. Plus, he's taken Liverpool to Champions Leagues. They've won a title now, countless domestic cup trophies as well. Wayne Rooney, I'm in agreement with, although like you look at Aguero.
This is the hardest one, was Rooney.
Aguero. But Rooney's raw talent, the way he burst onto the scene, and just that, there was that aggressive energy about him I quite like. Although Aguero as a finisher in the box was superior. Hazard you've put on the left. A very, very amazing silky footballer that I think injuries and lack of consistency at the end, and then just becoming a waste man at Real, tarnishes his reputation a little bit. But Hazard
doesn't tarnish his Premier League reputation. Tarnishes his reputation, not his reputation at Chelsea.
He was at times unplayable, but he'd also go missing in games sometimes. I know it's a difficult one with Hazard.
I mean, for me, he went missing for a whole season, Eden Hazard. But then that would for me be the only reason to drag him out, because again, you've got a player there actually who, bar let's say 1.5 seasons where it felt like he disappeared at different stages, that he had every right at his best to be considered the best player in the league. And I mean, when he was at it, he's the only player who has ever generally made me nearly crap my pants in a football stadium who wasn't playing for Arsenal. Like Omri, Bergkamp, Perez, Overmars, like, you'd shit yourself about these players. We played when we beat Chelsea 5-3 New Year's Day. People remember the iconic Kane goals and stuff, and it was the Chelsea team that went on to win the league. He was the best player on the pitch, even though he lost 5-3. He was absurdly talented, and he could win a game on his own. So I think it's easy to forget as well. He was at Chelsea for what, 9 years, was it? And 9 or 8 years. This was a long period as well. Which, when you think of, like, to go back to Rooney versus Aguero, which I found the hardest call, like, literally could be Aguero over Rooney. And I went back and I looked at the statistics of, like, Rooney versus Aguero from 2007 onwards, and Aguero does edge him out just about, I think, on the goals scored over that. But it's so close. I think it's easy to, with someone like Rooney, where it's regressed, and then you see him in the Everton shirt at the end and stuff, you forget how incredible he was in that period of sort of 2007 to sort of like 2011, 12, for example. I mean, when Ronaldo left, he absolutely picked up every mantle that they needed in terms of talismanic nature, goal scoring. He showed he could play as a 10, as a 9, he could play deeper. I think that just gives Rooney the slight edge. Leaving Aguero's out is ridiculous, and he's not the only one. So, I mean, in terms of explosive, brilliant goal scoring, Luis Suarez at Liverpool, I mean, it's probably the best single season, I would say, from a striker in the Premier League, arguably ever. I mean, him and admittedly Sturridge and Sterling were a part of it, but I mean, they conceded like nearly 60 goals and nearly won the league. And Suarez was a big reason for that. Robin van Persie at
Brilliant.
Arsenal,
And United.
who really again picked up the mantle when Thierry Henry left, and then obviously Emmanuel Adebayor left. Really kicked on. What a player! I mean, scary as in terms of his striking ability.
When he hit a ball, it stayed hit.
Went to United and obviously won the title as well. And Harry Kane has to be worthy of conversation.
Yeah, agreed.
As well. But I think Kane discounted against the others because he didn't have an explosive like Suarez, and also obviously hasn't got a title. But it's not to mean we should discount him in the future when we're talking. I mean, if Harry Kane beats Shearer's record, he arguably has to be in an all-time Premier League team. But I think at the moment, for the last 15 years, it was Rooney just over Aguero for me. And again, the forward players you're leaving out, even down to people like Raheem Sterling and stuff. Joke. Jamie Vardy is, I guess, is worthy of conversation. Riyad Mahrez. So many players you're leaving out. You're like, oh, wow, how am I leaving them out? Michael Carrick's another name we haven't mentioned at all on this podcast, who could have been worthy of, I think, particularly the latter team, possibly in place of Kante, for example. The players you leave out, let's say it breaks your heart. I'm just waiting for the arguments, basically.
So, who'd win? I know who I think would win.
Well, go on, you tell me.
The new team, 07 to 2022.
So why?
Football's changed, where I think the previous team would be better at getting the ball back to front quicker, but I think the latter team would keep possession of the ball for longer. But then you're thinking about defensively, if like David Silva and Kevin De Bruyne are passing it around and keeping the ball, Vieira coming into break-up play and Scholes coming into break-up play, that's a hell of a midfield. But then you've got Kante go inside. So I just think the team later had the ability to hold possession better, patiently, but also with the likes of Salah and Hazard, you've got the explosiveness where you can get in behind and bear down on goal and score more goals. I think they've got more.
Yeah, but then if you want to talk about matchups, if you're generally putting them versus like Ashley Cole, the way he used to play Ronaldo, what's to say he wouldn't have played Mo Salah really well?
That's true.
And you'd have you'd have probably Tony Adams inside of that as well. So I mean, how easy would it be for a Mo Salah to get through? I mean, that midfield with Vieira, Scholes, Beckham, and Giggs. I mean, you're not lacking for quality in terms of keeping the ball, and there's nothing there in that 11 where you'd look like there's let's say, an extravagant player who's going to let you down. You know, someone like an Ozil. Someone like an Ozil on his day was magnificent, but if it was away from home, you don't actually know if he's going to turn up for you, for example. Like those 11 in the first 15 years team, absolutely you would take to war with you. No problem.
Yeah, but I think the game's evolved where it depends. If you're playing the game in the 90s where they maybe let refs give less protection, and nowadays they'll be getting called for fouls left, right, and centre. I just think if you play it in the modern era, the modern team will win.
What if you put like Ferguson in charge of the first team and Guardiola in charge of the more recent team? Would that change anything if you did something like that?
I just think the quality of football would be better with the modern team. I'm biased. I don't know is the honest answer, but I think they would keep the ball better. They'd be better on the counter, and defensively they're fairly solid. But Thierry Henry running against John Terry, I'd back Thierry Henry every time over John Terry. So yeah, it's a tough one. Really tough.
Even you could have, obviously, in terms of Henry, obviously used to drift left.
Yeah.
You got Kyle Walker on that side.
He's rapid.
For the more modern team.
Yeah, I'd go with the modern team, James.
I think that is really, really, really close. But I wouldn't really like to say, to be honest. I think you could make a case for either.
Stop sitting on the fence.
Shearer and Henry together. I mean, do they ever go through a game and not score? If you had them both together, I mean, it looks ridiculous. I feel like individually, the first 15 years team might be a little bit better, but I think tactically the more modern team with that extra man in midfield, I think the way the game's gone would probably mean too much in all honesty.
James says the latter team as
But
well.
it's not as clear cut as I thought it would be. No way at all. You could make a case either way on this, I think.
Correct. And on that note, listeners, James and I are going to hide behind the sofa, ready and waiting for all the comments and Twitter to jump in and the debate.
On YouTube, I might turn the comments off.
Oh, but this podcast is not designed as a definitive, but just an enjoyable debate around football as well. Hope you enjoyed it. Do make sure you're subscribed wherever you are listening to the podcast. If you're interested in getting more content from us and supporting the show, patreon.com/Planet FPL. Today, we're doing a special Money in Football look at the Glazers' time at Manchester United, as well as additional content throughout the week. Sky Fantasy Football back at you tomorrow.
Yes.
Thank you, Mo Salah, for that crap captaincy yesterday.
Thank you, Sky, for removing the couple of points off Kalidou Koulibaly.
Wow. What for?
They've reduced him from tier 2 tackles to tier 1 tackles.
Oh, dear.
We'll
talk about
2 points cost you a lot in rank at this
It
stage.
does as well. I hope you're enjoying the content, and I hope you're looking after yourselves. Stay safe. Back at you tomorrow. Ciao for now.
Thanks, everyone. Rather than play it your way, pick it your way. Cue music, please, man, child.